code of appropriate conduct. And therefore, we ask that you please keep your conversations and questions respectful and professional. And Kevin has just put that code of conduct in the chat. So if you want to look at that in more detail, you're welcome to do that. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, Kevin Unrath, past president of the Vermont Library Association, is on hand to help out with that. So welcome, my name is Amy Olsen. I am the library director at the Lanphier Memorial Library in Hyde Park. And presenting with me today is Emily Nielsen. She is the student attendance specialist at the Lamoille Restorative Center. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now with our slideshow. Emily and I are also members of the Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille, and Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille's acronym is REAL. So I'm going to be referring to it as REAL. When I say REAL, I mean Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille. There's an overall committee of REAL, and then there are subcommittees, and REAL Schools is one of those subcommittees. There's also a youth coalition and outreach and civic group. REAL's mission is to create a community coalition. We are open to all who are invested in building a safe, equitable, anti-racist community where all can thrive regardless of the color of their skin, ethnicity, religion, sexuality, gender, or any other aspect of their identity. So Emily and I, along with the amazing Hannah Miller, who is a professor of education at NVU Johnson, and also Kate Donnelly, who is a Vermont representative to the State House for Hyde Park, Johnson, Wolcott, and Belvedere. The four of us formed a subgroup under REAL Schools to create a community read using the book Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. This is the young adult version of Ibram X. Kendi's National Book Award winning book, Stamped from the Beginning, a definitive history of racist ideas in America. And it's also important to note that Stamped, the young adult version, has the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom named it one of the 10, they didn't name it, they reported that it was one of the top 10 most challenged books of 2020. And Stamped has also been selected as next year, school year, the 2021-2022 Green Mountain Book Award list. So that is pretty exciting. We'll be calling the book Stamped for short, but when we're referring to Stamped, it's the Jason Reynolds young adult version. There we go. So our agenda today, I'm going to give a brief history of this project, and then Emily will talk about the fun stuff, how we did it, the close read and the themes and the touchstones that were sort of our guideline. We'll do a little example of how it worked, and then we will talk about action plans because we felt very early on in the planning process of this community read that it needed to be more than just a one and done book discussion, that there needed to be some sort of expectation for action after the community read was over, beyond reading and discussing the book. And then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. Okay. The brief history. Those of you who know me know that brevity is not my strength, so I'll try. I have to sort of brag about Emily though, because in 2019, she was working at NVU Johnson, and she got to hang out with Jason Reynolds for a day because his book Long Way Down was their close read selection for the 2019 school year. And so in the course of the day, Jason Reynolds shared with Emily that in March of 2020, this book that he wrote with Ibram X. Kendi, the young adult version of Stamped, was coming out. So Emily happened to share it with myself and Hannah and Kate about this, and we started formulating a plan to create a community read for this book. The idea being that we would get a bunch of people reading the book, and then they would take the book and read it with people and discuss it with people in their spheres of influence. So at home or work or in organizations they belong to. So the four of us began meeting virtually last spring. We came up with a format that Emily is going to talk to you about. And then we needed copies of the books. So here are some of our sponsors that helped us get copies of the book so that we could do the community read. Kat Gallagher is the superintendent of schools at Lamoille North Supervisory Union, and it was kind of a coup to get her support because we really wanted to include the school systems. And also the Bijou, they were just champs because they had drive-in movies last year. And they showed Harriet and donated a portion of the admissions from that to this project. So, so we were able to get books. We had books, we had the format, and we needed the people. We ended up having about 70 or more than that people sign up who were interested. And those were teachers, librarians, both school and public librarians, youth, REAL members from all the different committees of REAL, and other interested community members. And because we were using Zoom as our format, we were able to have that big group of 70 people and then use breakout rooms to have the individual discussions and then join back together as a big group again. So we had facilitators for those breakout room discussions. And before we had the big community read, we did a facilitator training. And it's sort of an orientation, and that's a condensed version of that is what Emily's going to do for you all. And so it was sort of like for people like me who were interested in facilitating, but I didn't really have the confidence or the comfort with being able to do that well. So getting people sort of a little bit of confidence and comfort with doing that. And then we had the big book discussion. I think we actually did 2 book discussions, and then we had a few follow-up programs to help people with their action plans, follow-up programs with action plans. I do want to let you all know that, did I say this already, that the slides would be available? So all the slides and information, that there are a lot of links in these slides, they're going to be on the conference website later on. So you're welcome to use whatever you want to from this. And the Lanphier Library has 3 sets of discussion copies, so 15 copies of the book in each set that you're welcome to borrow if you wanted to use any of this information or your own ideas for having a book discussion with this book. And I'm pretty sure the Department of Libraries has at least 1 discussion set as well. So Emily, unless I have forgotten something important, I'm going to turn over to you.
Thanks, Amy.
And just let me know when you need me to advance the slide, okay?
Okay, perfect. Thank you everybody for being here. It's really just so lovely to see folks interested in this project. So thank you. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the model that we use to discuss this book. And I will just admit up front that as a former educator, and I still work in education, but just not in the classroom. When I first learned about this model, I was really not excited. And that is because I love the spirit of just a free-flowing conversation, the dialogue, the debate, the energy that comes out of it. And when I read it without trying it, it seemed just like so stale and procedural. So I just want to acknowledge if any of those thoughts come to your mind, I totally get it. And I'll talk a little bit about why we ended up using this model and also the benefits of using the model, which, you know, take and leave what resonates with you. So the close read model, unlike a debate or a discussion or even like a book group conversation, is pretty structured. And it uses, if any of you are familiar with restorative practices or circle practices, it uses a similar model in that we sit in circle. If we're in person, virtually we create a circle order and put it into the chat, right? And that is to create, again, some structure, some safety, and hopefully to build community. So before we start talking about the book, we go around and have each member of the group introduce themselves, including their name, preferred pronouns, and we use, it's listed here as an icebreaker. I would say a better term might be a community builder, right? And so the important part of that piece is that we allow folks an opportunity to share a piece of themselves. And we let people have different levels of choice around how vulnerable or how much they want to share. So for example, we might use the prompt, please tell us about something that's on your person, right? Something you're wearing or a tattoo or some piece of something that is on your person today. And some people in that instance might say something like, I love the shirt I'm wearing, right? Whereas someone else might tell a rich and deep story about their ring and how it reminds them of their grandmother and who that figure was in their life, right? So they might reveal more or less about themselves, but the choice is theirs, right? So it creates that opportunity to make connection. After we did that, we referred to the touchstones, which will show you what those touchstones are, but they're basically guidelines to help support a conversation that is safe for, potentially safe for all members, hopefully makes space for more safety in the conversation, and reminds us really our intentions about coming together. We also go around and ask all participants to offer their general impressions of the book. And that could be a word or a sentence or two. It's not really a time for people to have like a long monologue. It's just basically, what are your general impressions that you want to offer to the whole group? Right? Then we ask the facilitator to summarize those impressions and thoughts, seeing if we can make some connections to get that conversation going. After that, we ask each participant to tell us a page number where a passage exists that they would like to read out loud to the group and discuss them, right? So the facilitator writes down the list of everyone's name and the page number that their passage is on, and then calls on participants in chronological order based on the numbers that they provided. And then participants read their passage aloud. And I always offer to read passages for people as well, because some people do not feel comfortable reading aloud, or it can be a barrier to conversation for some folks. And then we ask participants to connect that to a theme. And in the case of this book, we provided themes to participants well in advance so that as they were reading, they could look for a passage they wanted to share in connection with a theme, right? And I think the conversation is much more fruitful if people read the passage, identify the theme, and then really draw out the connections that they saw or the questions that were in their mind about how the passage and the theme connect. Right, so we go around and have everyone read their passage in chronological order, talk about the themes, right? And it is, again, not a time for debate or crosstalk as people are talking. So in sort of like strictest adherence to the model, the facilitator would have somebody read the passage, discuss their theme, and then would sort of pause and move on to the next person. Now, this can really be adapted. And when I facilitate, I have a very hard time not saying anything in between. So I often offer some kind of reflection like, this is what I heard you say, or I see this connection, right? Something brief that doesn't delve us into our, argument and discussion or push back, but just offers some piece of connection so that we continue the conversation. Right? After everyone has read their passages, we summarize. The facilitator summarizes their impression of things that came to light, right? So clarify, organize, reorient, extend the conversation, right? And then if any of the themes that were provided up front aren't covered, that could be a time to continue the conversation in that way, discussing the themes or asking questions of the group. Amy, is there anything you want to add to the close read model?
No, you got it. You ready for the next slide?
I am, thank you. So here are the themes that the group of us identified. We wrestled with which ones to choose. There are certainly many others that could be drawn out, but these are the ones we chose for the purposes of our project. So segregationist, assimilationist, and anti-racist ideas, right? The authors propose this framework for thinking about different ideas around race and racism, that most ideas or actions fall into one of those three categories. We also relied on this theme, racist policies lead to racist ideas, because this is one of the big ideas of Stamped, is that often we think in the opposite order, that racist ideas then lead legislators to make racist policies, but they flip that on its head, right, and say that it's really these policies that then created a lot of racist ideas. And certainly not every scholar of race and racism agrees with Ibram Kendi on this one, right? But it is a major framework of the book. We also looked at the intersection of racism and capitalism. The way in which anti-racism is a journey and not a destination, and is lifelong work, right? And they outline many figures who go through this journey and wrestle with it and struggle. And then we also highlighted the history of resistance, especially BIPOC folks who have historically resisted and been part of resistance movements that are not often highlighted in traditional history that we get. All right, thanks, Amy. So here are the touchstones that we use. So I think, Amy, they come up.
Should I just go? Yeah, should I just
go for it?
Okay.
Yes, so these touchstones were adopted from a resource that I'm forgetting right now, but maybe it's in our last slide. If not, we can find it and put it up there. But the idea is that we create, again, some boundaries to create an additional level of safety around the conversation, because this conversation can bring up a lot of trauma, a lot of emotion, right? A lot of stress. And so here are our touchstones: take space and make space, right? So encouraging people who speak, who are hesitant to speak up, and people who talk a lot to make space for others. Asking folks to stay engaged, knowing that this conversation is an invitation and never an invasion. So as a facilitator, you can decide if it's okay for participants to simply pass and not participate. Typically when I've facilitated, that is how I have done it, is letting everybody have the option not to participate whenever they don't want to. And we talked a lot about embracing things like discomfort, imperfection, and non-closure, right? These are not easy conversations when we're talking about race and racism. Confidentiality was really big for us. So we didn't record our conversations. We asked people to commit to keeping the conversations that were had in the group within their group and not sharing it more broadly. And also virtual consideration around confidentiality is that if you're doing this meeting in your own home and there's other family members around, seeing if you can find a private space so that other folks aren't hearing what other people in your group are sharing. Right. And then just assumptions around everybody being there with the intention to do no harm. And then this commitment to calling in and calling people out if racist things are being said. And we trained our facilitators with some good phrases to use. And we have a resource that we can share with you at the end around calling in and calling out. Right, and then a commitment not to use the N-word in the actual word, because there are passages in the book that use that, or it may come up in conversation. And then this notion that when the going gets rough, we'll turn to wonder. So again, you can create your own touchstones if you want to have a conversation like this, or borrow these if they're appealing to you. But I think the idea is just that we create some community agreements before we move forward and keep those things in mind. And it's also this thing that we can always come back to if the conversation goes someplace that a facilitator doesn't feel comfortable with, or if the safety in the group starts to erode. All right, thanks, Amy.
Sure, I just, the calling in and calling out is a link on the end, and that is a really great document to look at. And one of the community builders that was done in our discussion was to, and one of the discussions anyway, was to choose a touchstone and kind of express what it means to you or think about what it means. So that's just sort of a ready-made way to review the touchstones, but also have a community builder at the same time.
Yeah, and we sent everybody all this information well ahead of time so that as they were reading, they could keep those things in mind as well. And I've also, when I led book discussions at NBU, we had them available during the conversation as well to make sure everybody could see them. So that, again, that was something that was just integrated into the conversation. Amy, what other things did I forget in all that rambling?
I don't think anything, but we are cruising through our agenda very quickly. So there will be plenty of time for questions at the end, or leaving early, gosh. But I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next slide with just the, oops, I think, oh yeah, just one. Hannah Miller, one of the team members who was really instrumental in making this program happen, the professor of education at NVU Johnson. She uses Pear Deck. And so I know that there are other formats, other platforms out there that you can kind of have this interactive experience in a Zoom meeting or in other virtual meetings. But she used Pear Deck so that we could do some of those community builders. I left this slide in just because it has a good graphic to look at. And Emily and I were thinking that maybe we would just demonstrate what that close read would look like in action. So I chose a quote, and Emily's going to play the part of the facilitator because she's amazing. And I actually think that I'm going to go back to the slide that showed the themes, because that's kind of what we want to look at. I think I'm going to do that. Oh, I have to go back through all the touchstones.
I'll just say one thing about Pear Deck as you're doing that. For folks who haven't used it, it is a platform that participants can connect to using their phone or any technology, and then their responses are posted anonymously, which I have found can be a nice way to ease into conversations about race and racism if people are feeling a little bit hesitant about sharing their voice. Is that they can start off in this anonymous manner. So we asked questions that were like not connected to race and racism at all to begin with, and then started to ask some questions more related to the book and allowed people to respond anonymously, and then had the facilitator just sort of capture themes that were arising through Pear Deck. I think it's a great piece of technology. It's really easy to use. And it can integrate with Google Slides and other presentation mediums. So if you ever wanted to host a virtual book discussion, I find it to be a great platform. But teachers also use it in the classroom all the time. And it can be adapted for multiple different kinds of venues. All right, so Amy and I will do our example. So Amy, what page is your quotation on?
My quotation is on page 58.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, so whenever you're ready, feel free to read it out loud.
Thanks. When it came to Black people, Jefferson's whole life was one big contradiction, as if he were struggling with what he knew was true and what was supposed to be true. In 1784, Jefferson moved to Paris, his wife had died, and his old Monticello home suddenly felt pretty lonely. He was exhausted from his grief and years of being hunted by the British. So he did what he always seemed to do in moments of crisis. He ran to France. As soon as he made contact with the French foreign minister, he sent word home to his own slaves to speed up tobacco production in hopes that French merchants could pay back British creditors. On one hand, Jefferson was telling his slaves to work harder. And on the other hand, he was telling abolitionists that there was nothing he wanted more than to end slavery. So this quote made me think about the theme of racism and capitalism, and that even when presented with opportunities to make change or to free enslaved people, this is just one example of many in the book where the choice was made to take the capitalist route and speed up the tobacco production or to make more money instead of the human side of the choice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making that connection. And we can just see how early in our nation's history, right, the foundational folks, the foundational moments of what we know as the United States of America now is built on this intersection, right, of racism and capitalism. And these folks that we often hold up as the founders of our nation, right, have these deeply troubling histories around racism, right, embedded into that early capitalism in our country. So thank you so much for highlighting that.
So that's basically how it would work in the moment.
And facilitators also really can say, just thank you, right? And move on. I think one of the, in an ideal world, one of the beauties of having the close read model is that it can be more equitable, right? So that for folks who might feel hesitant to get into a debate, it provides space for them to say something without, again, pushback, argument, people tearing down their ideas, right? It just creates a space for a voice to come up, right? And maybe get a quick reflection from the facilitator. but without that sort of pushback or challenge. And then for people who tend to talk a lot, it creates some container for their voice so that other people's voices can come up as well. So, hopefully it becomes more equitable, more democratic, right? More voices can come to the table through the close read model. And I think in some ways it would, it potentially challenges some of the, some white supremacy culture, right? Where this idea of having to be right all the time, or having to prove ourselves, or having to wield language in a certain way, those kinds of skills are often privileged and congratulated, right? Whereas this model just allows people some space to speak and doesn't have it be like a competitive model, right? Where you have to like be the most right or say the most articulate thing. And so those are some pieces about the close read model when it's done well that I think are really beneficial, especially in having tough conversations.
I also think that as a facilitator who may not have a comfort level with discussing race with an unknown group of people, that it also gives some parameters for the facilitator to feel a little bit more comfortable with too. So
yeah, and I think staying rooted in the text, there's like a really beautiful part of that, and it also creates some safety, right? We're just using the words of the author for the most part, and then connecting to these themes. Instead of allowing all this space to lead off into like other parts of the conversations around race and racism.
Which is both a good reason to use close read, and also if you want more meat in your discussion, it kind of closes off from that. So that's a benefit and a challenge for using close read. Emily, was there anything else before I move on to action plans?
I think you can move on to action.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, we felt very strongly at the beginning of planning and organizing this that we wanted to incorporate some sort of expectation of action afterwards. And Jason Reynolds this is a quote from his afterword in the book, but I have to warn you, scrolling will never be enough. Reposting will never be enough. Hashtagging will never be enough, because hatred has a way of convincing us that half of love is whole. What I mean is that we, all of us, have to fight against performance and lean into participation. We have to be participants, active. And so we kind of took that quote as our call to participants to think about what kind of action they could take after the book discussion is over, because there is this feeling of when you're discussing a book with other people, you kind of get excited and motivated. So how can you maintain that momentum, or how can you sort of keep that spirit going? But at the same time, it's also really daunting to know. It's a little scary and hard to know, like, what can I do? Because I have no idea. I know how to read books to help me gain understanding of the world. And that's an action that I can take within myself, but how do I turn that into being an active participant? So Hannah and Emily came up with some anti-racist action plan guiding questions, and that link is right here on the slideshow that takes you to those questions. So we helped people kind of with these questions could answer, really think about ideas that you could do within your spheres of influence or within what you do. And included in that is further guidelines for white folks, like decentering whiteness and how to do that, or check your fragility. So there's those action plan guidelines are in this slideshow. So when we have it on the website, you can click that link and see what that looks like. With our program, we also, I'll switch to the slide, we came up with just a brainstorming of some ideas that people could consider doing. And that kind of gives people something to go with, something to think about. And I just wanted to share, just out of this, there was something as simple as there was a woman who was part of the discussion who decided that her action plan would be to attend the weekly silent rally in Johnson. She'd never been to a rally before, never been to a protest before, and there's a silent protest every Tuesday night in Johnson, Vermont. And it's been going on since November 2016. And so she started attending that silent rally, that silent protest every week. And someone else who was part of the discussion is an actress. And she, as her action plan, decided that she wouldn't take any jobs that didn't also have BIPOC folks as part of the cast, the crew, somewhere in the production of whatever she was working on. We also offered and encouraged people to have an accountability partner. So a lot of people who were teachers had automatic accountability partners and their coworkers, and many of them had the same action plan that they were working on together. But this idea that when you go back to your regular world, it's so easy to forget that you had made this plan and you wanted to do something. So if you had an accountability partner to check in with from time to time, you can kind of see where you are, help guide each other, or just give each other a little reminder like, hey, don't forget you had an action plan that you were thinking about. So, and so, like I said, some of those accountability partnerships happened really naturally. And some of them we offered to connect people with each other if they had trouble finding someone and really wanted someone to connect with. For myself, I had a couple of action plans. I had a professional one and a personal one. And my professional action plan was to think about policies and racial equity policies in libraries specifically. And I have to say that it's pretty complex when I started to do the research a little bit more, and I'm still working on that. But in the slides, I did put a link to I think it's the Government Association or something. It's GARE is their acronym of Racial Equity Government something. And they had worked with a library system in, I think, Wisconsin. And so they have a library policy, a racial equity library policy study that they did. And that is in if you're interested, in the resources page. And the one thing that I will say is that I'm taking baby steps toward that. So even though I have this bigger plan that I'm interested in, I know it's going to take a lot more work, and like my library is going to do a strategic plan. So that's going to be part of that. So it's all going to kind of build there. But in the meantime, I'm taking baby steps. And one of the baby steps is that we just got Juneteenth. Our trustees voted to add Juneteenth as a paid closed holiday. So the library will be closed on June 19th every year to also celebrate a day when all Americans were free. So that's pretty cool, I think. Pretty cool and exciting, but also it's a baby step. So. And here are the additional resources that we have. If you're interested in learning about Racial Equity Alliance of Lamoille, that calling in and calling out page. There is an educator's guide for Stamped. So if you're interested in that, or you might already know about it, the Government Alliance on Race and Equity, that was the GARE. And also First Book, I think some of you might be familiar with them. They did a really cool Empowering Educators last year, curriculum, videos. And so that's really interesting to look at. I don't have anything else as part of this. Emily, am I missing something, or do you have more to share about it?
I just wanted to say a couple things about the action plans. One is that Amy is being humble. She is the one who really pushed us to do the action plans. And I'm so glad that she did, because I know for myself as a white-bodied person, I can really pat myself on the back for reading books and feeling like, okay, we're good now, right? But that hasn't actually positively impacted my community beyond sort of like me potentially reframing my thinking and potential future ways of being in the world. But I think the action plans really pushed people, including myself, to translate new learning into something that was like manifest out in the world, and challenged, I think, a lot of white participants to make sure that they were doing that with integrity, right? And it really furthered a lot of people's learning. So when you have to apply something, I think it does require that next level of thinking, of analyzing, of critical thinking, and really incorporating it, right? And then also made that positive actual change out in the community. So I'm really appreciative to Amy for pushing us to include that piece. I think it was hugely impactful. And a lot of educators who participated, I think it impacted their classroom practices, which is really cool. So thank you to Amy. So that was the only thing I wanted to end with. And I'm curious if folks have questions.
Yeah, I'm going to stop sharing so that we can kind of see the chat a little bit more, and go ahead and you can unmute or raise your hand or however your preferred method of question asking is.
Yeah.
Amy, would you prefer that I end the recording at this point?
Yeah, that's a good idea, Kevin. Thank you for thinking
Okay.
of that.
Wonderful presentation. I will end the recording and give folks a chance to ask questions.
Thank you.